Welcome to Mac 1140, Exam 2, Question 2 of the free response. In this problem, they go ahead and they give you two functions, f of x and g of x, and they first want you to go ahead and find the composite function, f of g. And all f of g means is take your g function and plug it into your f function. It's always the second function into the first function. And then we want to simplify. So we can go ahead and plug this into all the x's over here, and the only x is this x squared. And you can see, since this is a square root, plugging into the squared, they'll cancel each other out. So we'll just be left with 1 over, and right here you would have just a 16 minus x squared. Technically you'd have the square root and the square, but then they would cancel each other out. And then you have a minus 16. So then you can see that this would be 1 over 16 minus x squared minus 16, and then the 16s would cancel out. So you're just going to be left with negative 1 over x squared. Because you'd have 1 up top, x squared on the bottom, and you still have this negative floating around, so you can just bring it out front. So the second part was, what's the domain of this newly created composite function? Now we have to remember that the domain is not only the domain of the newly created function, but we also have to go ahead and check it with the domain of the function we're plugging in. We don't care about the function we plug into, so we need to check for the intersection of the domain of g of x and f of g of x. And you can see you can't plug 0 into here, obviously, so that's going to be excluded from the domain. And up top here, you can go ahead and see that you don't want to be any larger than 4 or any smaller than negative 4. Because essentially, what's the domain of this? Well, it's just wherever the inside of the radical doesn't equal a negative number. So you can go ahead and just set this equation up, say when is he greater than 0, and you'll find out that you're trapped in between negative 4 and positive 4. So what we can do is we can go ahead and say the domain of that was between, and we can actually equal that too. So negative 4 to positive 4, but that's including 0, and we said we wanted to exclude 0. So that means the overall domain would be negative 4, comma 0, parenthesis union, parenthesis 0, to positive 4, bracket. That's going to be our overall domain. It's the domain of that guy and the domain of this one combined. So the second part, or rather the third part, says f of g of 3. So all that is, well, we know what our f of g function is. It's just this guy. And they want you to plug a 3 into that. So we can just simply plug 3 into this. You could have taken 3 and plugged it into this, gotten the answer out, and then plugged it into that, and got an answer out. And then that would be the same thing. But why not just go ahead and use our simplified version? So that's just going to be 1 over negative 9. Because 3 squared is 9, negative 1/9. Then they go ahead and they ask you two more questions. They say, what's f divided by g and its domain? So all that is just taking this function and dividing it by that function. So we have this function, 1 over x squared minus 16, divided by the square root of 16 minus x squared. So if this is divided, you can really think of this as this being over 1. And if you have a fraction over a fraction, we can flip and multiply. So I'm going to actually write it above it. So if you flip and multiply, then you just get 1 over x squared minus 16 times the square root of 16 minus x squared. Now you can go ahead and actually simplify this slightly, because we can see that we could first off pull a negative out of this. If you pull a negative out of this, so we'll toss the negative on the outside, this becomes negative and this becomes positive. And then this is just 16 minus x squared, which is the exact same thing we have inside here. So if you have two of the same thing and they're multiplying, we can add their exponents. The exponent of this just being an implied 1, and the exponent of this being a 1/2, because it's a square root. So 1 plus 1/2 is 3/2. So we could actually write this as negative 1 all over 16 minus x squared to the 3/2 power. And then that would be your newly created function. Now what's the domain of this function? Well, the domain of this function is the domains of these functions, but also we have to go ahead and we know that g can't be equal to 0. Because while g can equal 0 originally, that's fine, but obviously you can't divide by 0, that would make you undefined. So we can go ahead and see, well, we know the domain of this function already says it's going to be between -4 and 4, but we can't actually equal 4 or -4, because at 4 and -4, that's where this goes to 0. So really, right now, the domain we have is going to be -4 to 4, but with parentheses and not brackets. And then if we take this into consideration, we also know that this could that this can't be 4 or -4 either, right? Because that just gives you a 0 on the bottom. So our domain of this function is going to be -4 to 4, non-inclusive. So you're going to have parentheses. And then that's how you go ahead and find a composite function, the dividing, the quotient function, their domains, and then simply just plugging in 3 into that composite function.